My name is John Baxter, and I'm 27 years old. When Sophia Vance told me to go back to my fantasy football games, she didn't know she was holding a grenade with the pin pulled. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday at Zenith Technologies. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew and me. The smell of pine-scented cleaner mixed with the aroma of stale coffee from my mug. I preferred it this way. No interruptions, no meetings about meetings, no the buzz of empty conversations. Just code, coffee, and the constant hum of the air conditioning creating that perfect white noise. A digital mantra that helped me focus. My 3 monitors cast a bluish glow on my face, displaying the authentication system I had built over the last 2 years. Every line of code was like a brushstroke in a complex work of art. It wasn't just elegant code. It was a digital fortress, a security architecture that made Zenith's platform competitive against companies 10 times its size. 6 patents pending, all meticulously filed in my name because I had paid for the entire legal process out of my own pocket, using my personal equipment on my own time. It was my work, my creation, my property. The sharp click of heels on the porcelain floor echoing down the hallway broke my concentration like a stone in a calm lake. The rhythm was impatient, hurried. Still here, John. Sophia stood at my desk, a stack of papers in her hands. Her perfume, an expensive floral fragrance, invaded my space, aggressive and out of place in the sterile office environment. Don't you have a life outside of this place? She was 24, with a freshly minted MBA from Wharton and 0 real technical experience. Her main qualification seemed to be the fact that she was the daughter of the new CTO, Margaret Vance, who had joined the company 2 weeks ago with promises of fresh perspectives and a corporate jargon that made my teeth ache. I glanced at her briefly, just long enough to register her condescending smile, before turning back to the code. I was in the middle of a delicate process, debugging a critical encryption module for the big launch in 2 weeks. One mistake here could compromise millions in customer data. Right, she continued, ignoring my lack of response and adjusting the Louis Vuitton bag on her shoulder. Well, maybe you should take a break. Go back to your fantasy football games, kid. Leave the real work to people who understand it. The sentence hung in the air. Fantasy football games. She didn't even know what that was. Just used it as a synonym for something she considered childish and unimportant. I'd never played fantasy football in my life. And those lines of code she looked at as if they were hieroglyphics. They were the backbone that kept her company, her mother's company, running. They were what paid her salary and her expensive handbag. I didn't respond. Silence was the most potent weapon I had in that moment. After she walked away, the sound of her heels gradually fading, I stared at the screen. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something colder, clearer, as if a fog of passive frustration that had enveloped me for years had dissipated, revealing a sharp, clear path. It was a shift in perspective that turned years of biting my tongue into something calculated and deliberate. I saved my work and noticed the lights in the main conference room were still on. Through the glass partition, I saw Sophia presenting something on a large screen to Margaret. They were both laughing. Margaret nodded in approval, pointing at colorful graphs and pie charts. I knew what it was. They were the slides she had asked me to help prepare last week, simplifying complex technical concepts so she could present them as her own. I had carried the technical backbone of this company for 3 years. Now I was being treated like a glorified intern by someone who couldn't debug a simple for loop. In the elevator, heading down to the deserted garage, the smell of damp concrete filling the space, I realized something with crystal clarity. My patents were still mine. The process of transferring the intellectual property to the company, a bureaucratic process I had initiated myself, took 6 months. We were in the 3rd month. Until that final signature, legally, the technology that made Zenith run belonged to me. I drove home through the heavy rain, the drops hitting the windshield like tiny hammers, the wipers struggling to keep my vision clear. Exactly how my mind felt. With every red light, every flooded street, the idea solidified. This was no longer about being disrespected. It was about protecting what was mine. I joined Zenith right after college, when it was still a 40-person startup in a refurbished warehouse in the tech district. The founder, Daniel Cole, a brilliant programmer turned entrepreneur, would sit with us during late-night coding sessions, eating cold pizza and discussing complex architectural problems. He understood technology because he had built the first version of the product himself in his apartment. I remember one specific late night, solving a critical memory leak bug alongside him. We had been awake for 18 hours, fueled by liters of coffee, as he patiently suggested different approaches, drawing diagrams on a whiteboard until there was no space left. Daniel wasn't just a boss. He was a mentor who understood and valued real technical work. He saw the beauty in logic, the art in efficiency. 6 months ago, he stepped down as CEO to focus on his health. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The news hit the team like a bomb. The board, in a panic, brought in Margaret Vance from a major consulting firm to professionalize operations. Her resume was impressive, full of restructurings and cost optimizations, but her technical knowledge was limited to what she learned in business school 15 years ago. Sophia had joined 2 months ago as a strategic intern, a vague title that gave her license to sit in on every engineering meeting and offer suggestions on resource allocation. The week before, in a planning meeting, she suggested the development team was over-resourced and that we could deliver the same results with fewer people. Several senior developers, men and women with decades of experience, exchanged worried glances as she spoke about efficiency and agile methodologies, using the terms like magic amulets without demonstrating any real understanding of how things were actually built. The warning signs had been there for weeks, little red flags I had ignored. My name being subtly removed from internal technical documentation. Invitations to architecture meetings, which used to include me automatically, now only went to senior leadership. When I asked, the answer was always the same flimsy excuse, a scheduling error. But the errors were too frequent and consistent to be a coincidence. Yesterday, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. I was in the break room making coffee when I heard Margaret's voice from the hallway talking to the head of HR. They didn't notice me. I stood quietly, pretending to fiddle with my phone, my heart beating faster as I absorbed every word about restructuring and strategic realignment. They mentioned 30% cuts to the development team and hiring an external consultancy to optimize legacy code. My name was mentioned specifically. Baxter, Margaret said, is technically brilliant, but he isn't a team player. We need to reevaluate his role, perhaps something more focused on maintenance. Translation: we'll stick him in the basement to fix bugs until we don't need him anymore. Now, after Sophia's comment about my games, the picture was complete, sharp, and terrifying. They were using me for the launch and then discarding me. The next morning, the smell of rain still in the air, I found an email from Margaret sent at 11:47 the previous night. Subject: Core Development Team Restructuring. I opened it with an icy feeling in my stomach. My role was being transitioned to a junior position, focused on maintaining legacy systems, not core development of new products. Same salary, a tactic to avoid wrongful termination lawsuits, but reporting to a new hire, Robert Miller, a guy who had briefly worked with Margaret at her previous company. The decision, the email stated, was final, with implementation set for 2 weeks from now, right after the new product launch. The strategy was transparent and brutal. Keep me around long enough to ensure the launch, which depended entirely on my work, went smoothly, then marginalize and humiliate me before the patents were officially transferred to the company's name. My patents, my creation, would become the full property of Zenith in exactly 3 months. After that, I would be completely disposable. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in protest. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Thomas Gordon was a friend from college, a smart guy who had traded programming for law and specialized in intellectual property. "Let me get this straight," he said after I explained the situation in detail, his voice calm and methodical over the phone. "Your 6 patents cover the core authentication system, the data compression algorithms, and the real-time synchronization framework. And without those 3 components, Zenith's entire platform doesn't work." "Correct," I said, looking at the architecture diagrams on my screen. "It's the heart of the system. And the patents right at this moment are still 100% in your name." "For another 3 months," I confirmed. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could picture Thomas in his office, probably scribbling on a legal pad. "John, You are in a unique and extremely powerful legal position. They need your technology, but they don't legally have a right to it yet. Any code they're running on their servers that utilizes those patented processes belongs to you until the IP formally changes hands. What would happen if I revoked their access to my work? I asked, the question that had been burning in my mind. Legally, you have that right. Employment contracts typically cover future inventions, but your patents were filed before the specific language they inserted into your annual renewal contract. There's a gap in their legal coverage, a loophole the size of a truck, and practically, it would crash their systems instantly and completely. They'd have to develop alternatives from scratch, which would take months at a minimum. Years maybe, and it would cost millions. I thought of Sophia's dismissive comment, fantasy football games. I thought of Margaret's condescending smile. I thought of Daniel Cole, my mentor, battling cancer while watching the company he built, being dismantled by people who didn't understand its essence. I thought of the talented developers who would be laid off, people with families and bills to pay. How long to draft a cease and desist order, Thomas? I can have a draft ready for you to review by tomorrow morning. Do it. I arrived early the next day and, with a new determination, conducted a full, silent audit of all my contributions to the company's codebase. The results were even more extensive than I had imagined. Every critical module, every essential function, had my digital signature. Not metaphorically, but literally. I had implemented a versioning system that recorded every contribution with detailed, immutable metadata. The authentication framework was integrated into every login, every API call, every secure data transfer. The compression algorithms I created reduced their cloud storage costs by 60%, a savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. The synchronization protocols enabled real-time collaboration between users, Zenith's primary marketing and selling point. I hadn't just contributed, I had built the technological foundation that made the company competitive and valuable. Everything else was a user interface and business logic built on top of my work. But as I reviewed old emails and access logs, I found something deeply disturbing. 3 weeks ago, Margaret had requested full and detailed documentation of all core technical processes. For knowledge management purposes, she had said at the time, it seemed reasonable. 2 weeks ago, Sophia requested admin access to all code repositories. The logs showed she had downloaded complete copies of the entire codebase to an external drive. Last week, I noticed in the system logs that someone was copying large volumes of files to a location outside the company network. When I reported the incident to IT security, the response was that it was a backup procedure, authorized by senior management. They weren't just planning to marginalize me. They were systematically documenting and copying everything I had created so they could continue using it after they pushed me out. The plan was more sinister than I had thought. I found an email thread exchanged between Margaret's corporate email and a law firm specializing in mergers and acquisitions. The subject was IP acquisition strategies and minimizing key developer leverage. The conversation was dated just 2 days after she started at the company. One of the messages mentioned the need to neutralize potential intellectual property threats before the next investment round. My name appeared in an attached document, listing my patents as high-risk assets that needed to be secured for the company as soon as possible. This wasn't a reorganization. It was a deliberate, premeditated plan to steal my work. I called Thomas again, my voice tight with fury. Based on what you're telling me, he said. After hearing the new details, you not only have grounds for the cease and desist, but you may have a case for attempted misappropriation of intellectual property. Your patents are your private property. If they're using your technology without a formal licensing agreement, it's patent infringement. But I'm their employee, I argued, wanting to be certain. Your contract covers the work you do for them, but your patents, filed by you before the current clause, create a legal gray area. They know it. That's why they're moving so fast. Something inside my chest shifted at that moment. Frustration turned to ice. Anger turned to cold, calculated determination. The cease and desist order will be ready tomorrow at 10 a.m., Thomas confirmed, sensing the change in my tone. Perfect. The cease and desist order, an imposing legal document, was delivered promptly at 10 a.m. I watched through the glass wall of my workstation as a courier delivered the manila envelope directly into Margaret's hands. She opened it with a look of annoyance, which quickly morphed into confusion, then alarm, and finally restrained fury. She grabbed her phone, her face red. Sophia rushed into her office, gesticulating wildly. At 10:30, Margaret's assistant called me, her voice trembling, asking me to come to the executive conference room. I politely declined, stating that I was busy preparing for the scheduled maintenance window that I myself had announced to the entire team the day before. Maintenance on the authentication system. No one had questioned it. At 11 a.m. sharp, remotely from my own desk, I executed the script. With a few commands, I disabled access to my authentication framework. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for them. Every login attempt on the platform, internal or external, failed. Every API call returned a 403 forbidden error. Every real-time collaboration session lost its connection and was terminated. It was a complete and total digital blackout. My secondary monitor, which displayed the real-time system logs, turned into a waterfall of red error messages flowing like a river of digital blood. In less than 15 minutes, the customer support lines were overwhelmed. The development team descended into panic, desperately trying to understand the root cause of the problem. I saw Carlos, a senior developer and one of the few I respected, sweating as he traced the issue through the logs, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror as he realized the failure was coming from the authentication module. My phone started ringing incessantly. Numbers from colleagues, from management, from HR. I didn't answer. At 11:30, Margaret's office door flew open, and she marched directly to my desk, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. "John, what the hell did you do?" she hissed, her voice low and full of venom. I looked up calmly, removing my headphones. "I'm just exercising my legal rights, as specified in the cease and desist order you received. My patented technology is no longer available for unauthorized use by Zenith. This is sabotage. You'll be sued until you don't have a penny left." "It's not sabotage, Margaret. It's intellectual property protection. There's a very clear legal difference." Sophia appeared right behind her, her normally immaculate hair disheveled, her eyes wide with panic. "You can't just shut everything down. We have clients, we have contractual obligations, SLAs to meet." I met her eyes, and for the first time she couldn't hold my gaze. "You told me to go back to my games. I'm just following your advice." But as I watched the controlled chaos unfold around me, a sense of unease began to grow. A junior developer, Marina, was on the phone with a client, her voice strained and close to tears. "I understand, ma'am. We're working on it with the highest priority. Yes, I know it's about accessing the medical records for your father's treatment." Another colleague, on speakerphone, was trying to calm the owner of a small logistics company who had a deadline to deliver a project to a major client. They relied entirely on our platform to coordinate their deliveries. "You're our only option," the desperate voice came through the speaker. "If we can't access our data and submit the report by tomorrow, we lose the contract. There are 10 families that depend on that contract." Carlos ended a call with a heavy sigh and ran his hands over his face. He walked over to my desk, speaking low so only I could hear. "John," he said, his voice full of exhaustion, "I know you have your reasons, and honestly, most of us get it. But there's a hospital in Pittsburgh using our system to coordinate their emergency room staff schedules. It's not a life support system, of course, they have manual backups, but the lack of the system is causing logistical chaos for them right now." I felt a knot form in my chest. I had been so focused on Margaret and Sophia, on protecting my work, on avenging the disrespect and the attempted theft, that I hadn't fully considered the consequences for the people who had absolutely nothing to do with it. The system I brought down didn't just hurt Zenith as a corporation. It hurt real customers, real people who trusted the platform for their businesses, their operations, their health. "How many mission-critical clients do we have?" I asked Carlos, the arrogance of my revenge beginning to dissipate. "How do you define mission-critical?" "We have 47 large enterprise clients, hundreds of small and medium-sized businesses, thousands of individual users. A lot of them use the platform for essential work." I picked up my phone and moved to a corner, calling Thomas. "I need some quick legal advice. If I keep the systems down and it causes harm to third parties, like this hospital, can I be held liable? Technically, you're exercising your legal rights over your property. It's a grey area, but if there are demonstrable financial or operational damages to third parties, they could try to sue you. It would be a complicated legal battle. And morally, he paused. John, what is your actual endgame here? It was a good question. A question I should have asked myself sooner. I looked around the office. Marina was still on the phone, her voice now cracking, trying to soothe the client with the medical case. 2 developers were running between workstations, trying to find a solution that didn't exist. The customer support department was clearly overwhelmed and collapsing. My goal was to protect my work, to demand respect, to stop them from robbing me and casting me aside. But this was using a nuclear weapon to swat a fly, causing collateral damage to innocent civilians. Thomas, I said, the decision forming in my mind, prepare the documents for a negotiation. I'm turning the systems back on in 1 hour. I walked straight to Margaret's office. She was on the phone, her voice tense, and from what I could gather, it was someone from the board of directors. When she saw me standing in the doorway, she hung up abruptly. I have a proposal, I said before she could start yelling. I will restore the systems temporarily. Temporarily? She repeated, suspicious. We have 48 hours until the official launch. I will ensure everything goes smoothly. I will train whoever needs to be trained for the transition. But in return, we are going to negotiate a fair and final agreement regarding my patents. Sophia, who was in the corner of the room, was about to speak, but Margaret silenced her with a swift gesture. What kind of agreement do you have in mind? The patents remain mine in my name. Zenith receives an exclusive use license for 5 years in exchange for fair royalty payments on the revenue. After 5 years, the license becomes non-exclusive. I leave the company immediately after the transition, with a suitable severance package and positive references, and neither party will file legal action against the other. You're blackmailing us inside our own company, she spat the words. I'm negotiating. The alternative is I keep the systems down indefinitely, and we all lose. You, me, and more importantly, dozens of innocent clients who don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire. Margaret studied me for a long moment, her eyes calculating the options. Why the change of heart? An hour ago, you seemed ready to burn it all to the ground. Because I realized that destroying Zenith means destroying the work of a lot of good people who are still here, and it means harming clients who trusted us. This fight isn't about them. It's about respect and fair recognition for what I built. I saw something shift in her expression, a flicker of understanding, perhaps. I need to talk to the board. You have 2 hours. After that, my offer expires, and we go back to the legal stalemate. And I guarantee the tech press will love to hear all about it. I returned to my desk and, in a move I knew would be controversial, partially re-enabled the systems. Just enough for critical client operations to continue, but not fully functional for internal development. It was a middle ground, a demonstration that I was still in control, but also a gesture of good faith showing that my goal was not to harm innocent people unnecessarily. Carlos came to my desk. Thanks. The woman with the medical case got the data she needed. Listen, Carlos, I'm sorry for putting you and the team in this situation. You didn't deserve it. He shrugged, a tired smile on his face. Honestly, half the team is rooting for you. We all knew what they were trying to do. But John, you have to find a way to win that doesn't hurt us in the process too. He was right. Exactly 2 hours later, I got the call from Margaret. The board has agreed to negotiate your terms. But they have one condition. They want Daniel Cole present for the conversation, as a mediator. Daniel, our ailing founder, was being brought back to mediate the crisis at the company he created. The meeting was set for the next day in a neutral conference room outside the company. Daniel arrived in a wheelchair, visibly weakened by chemotherapy. Thinner, paler, but with the same sharp, intelligent eyes I remembered. John, he said in a weak but firm voice, tell me your side of the story. No sugarcoating. I explained everything. The patents, the deliberate plan to marginalize me, Sophia's comment, my drastic reaction, and what I learned about the unintended consequences for innocent people. He listened to it all in silence without interrupting. Then he turned slowly to Margaret. And your version? She hesitated, her corporate arrogance fading under Daniel's piercing gaze. We were restructuring to optimize efficiency. John is talented, but he's difficult to manage. We felt he would be more productive in a different role. Difficult to manage, Daniel repeated, the words sounding like an absurdity. Margaret, when I founded this company, the #1 principle was simple. Whoever builds the technology gets a voice in the decisions about the technology. John built the backbone of what made us competitive, and you were planning to shove him into a maintenance closet and keep his work. It wasn't quite like that. It was exactly like that. I've read the copies of the emails John provided to his lawyer. Daniel then turned to me. But John, you were also wrong. Shutting down the systems was an act of power, but it hurt innocent people, clients who trusted us. You had every right to protect your work, but you didn't have the right to harm third parties in the process. I felt the weight of his words. They were the truth. I know. That's why I stopped and offered to negotiate. Daniel nodded, satisfied. Here's what's going to happen. John, your patents remain yours. Zenith will have a 5-year exclusive license with a 3% royalty on gross revenue from products using your technology. Zenith will pay you a severance of 2 years' salary. You will receive positive references, and you stay through the launch to ensure a smooth and professional transition. He then looked at Margaret, and you will learn that in a tech company, respect for the builders is not optional. It is essential for survival. Finally, he turned to Sophia, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. And you, young lady, will learn that dismissive comments and arrogance have consequences. You're out of engineering. Go to marketing or sales or any area where you don't have to pretend you understand what you clearly do not. The launch happened the following week, as planned. It went off without a hitch. I spent the next 2 weeks training Robert Miller, who I discovered was a competent engineer when not under direct pressure from Margaret to execute an unethical plan. I passed my critical knowledge on to Carlos and other senior developers, ensuring they wouldn't be left in the lurch. In my last week, Margaret called me for a private conversation in her office. I know you see me as the villain in this story, she began, surprisingly direct. And maybe I am. But I want you to understand one thing. When the board hired me, Zenith was in serious financial trouble that Daniel, out of pride, was hiding. We had 6 months of cash left. The pressure was immense to cut costs, increase efficiency at any price, and make us attractive to investors or a potential buyer. She paused, looking out the window. It doesn't justify how I treated you, but it explains why I was so obsessed with controlling every aspect of the company, including the intellectual property. I was terrified of losing any competitive advantage we had. Why are you telling me this now? Because you were right about one thing. I don't deeply understand the technology. I tried to compensate for that failing with control and authority. It was a mistake. Daniel just gave me 3 months to prove I can lead this company while respecting the technical team. Or he comes back from his treatment as CEO and I'm out. It was the first time I saw her as something more than a ruthless, ambitious executive. I saw a person under enormous pressure, desperately trying to save a company on the brink of collapse and making terrible mistakes in the process. Take some unsolicited advice, I said. Hire a real CTO, someone you trust who understands technology deeply. You focus on operations and business. Leave the technical decisions to the experts. She nodded slowly. Carlos suggested the same thing this morning. I left Zenith Technologies with a generous check in my pocket and something far more valuable, a painful clarity about who I was and what I valued. Spent the next 3 months traveling, unplugged, thinking, processing. I read about business ethics, about leadership. I studied cases of conflicts between innovators and corporations. I talked to other developers who had faced similar situations. The uncomfortable truth was that I was entirely right to defend myself, but terribly wrong in the execution. Protecting my intellectual property was legitimate. Using that protection to harm innocent customers was not. With the severance money and the first royalty checks, I founded Digital Fortress, but this time with a non-negotiable set of principles. First, automatic intellectual property protection for all developers. Every line of code tracked and attributed. Clear and fair contracts about ownership from day one. Second, a culture of absolute respect for technical competence. The builders have a voice proportional to their impact, no exceptions. Third, a sacred responsibility to our clients. Never use technology as a weapon in a way that harms innocent third parties. I hired Carlos as my first CTO. He brought over Marina and several other good developers from Zenith who were unhappy. We built something better. In the first 6 months, 3 of Zenith's competitors licensed my technology directly from me for substantial fees. In the first year, Digital Fortress had 80 employees and a market valuation of $200 million. 2 years later, I received an unexpected call. "John, it's Daniel. I need to ask you a favor." His voice was weak, tired. "Of course, Daniel. What do you need?" "Zenith is being sold. We found a good buyer, a company that will keep the team and the projects, but they're worried about the dependency on your technology. The exclusive license expires in 3 years. Would you consider renewing for a longer term?" "Why would I do that?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because 150 people still work there. Good people who had nothing to do with what happened. If you don't renew the license, the buyer might pull out of the deal and the company will fold." It was a fair request. "Send me the details of the proposal. I'll consider it." I studied the acquisition proposal. The buyer seemed decent, with a culture focused on technology, not short-term value extraction. I renewed the license for another 10 years, but with contractual clauses that protected Zenith's employees from arbitrary layoffs for at least 24 months. "Thank you," Daniel said when I told him my decision. "You could have let us die." I could have, but that wouldn't be about justice. It would be about revenge. And I've learned the difference. Daniel passed away 6 months later. At the funeral, Margaret approached me. "He always spoke of you in his last few months," she said. "He said you became what he himself should have been, someone who stood up for his values but knew where to draw the ethical lines. He was a good mentor." "He was," she paused. "I'm leaving Zenith. The new owner brought in a real CTO like you suggested. I'm going back to consulting, but with a different focus, helping companies build cultures that respect technical talent. I think you'll be good at that." "Maybe. I certainly have a good case study on what not to do." 5 years after the day, I almost destroyed Zenith. Digital Fortress was worth $3 billion. We had 500 employees in 15 countries. Our technology protected billions of financial and data transactions daily. But my greatest pride wasn't in the numbers. It was in the culture we had created. We implemented the authorship protocol, a system that automatically tracked, attributed, and protected the intellectual contributions of every developer. If someone created something revolutionary, the ownership was clear and protected from the start. Fair contracts, proper recognition, zero room for exploitation. Other tech companies began to adopt our model. Developers from around the world sent us messages of thanks. We had managed to change, even on a small scale, how our industry treated its creators. One day I received an unexpected email. The sender was Sophia Vance. "John, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I've spent the last 5 years working in marketing for tech companies, truly learning about the industry. Recently, I started studying programming at night. Not to try to be a senior engineer. I have zero illusions about my limitations, but to truly understand what I was trying to manage years ago. If Digital Fortress ever needs someone who understands both the technical side and the business side, and is willing to give a second chance to someone who made huge mistakes, but learned from them, I would love to talk." "No expectations, Sophia." I showed the email to Carlos. "It's your call," he said. "But remember what you always say. People can change and deserve the chance to prove it." 3 months later, Sophia started as a junior product manager. Not in engineering. She was right about her limitations, but on the delicate bridge between the technical team and the business team. It was incredibly difficult for her. The team was skeptical, distrustful. She had to prove every decision, justify every step, accept criticism she once would have considered a personal insult. But she persisted, with a humility I never thought she possessed. A year later, she identified a market opportunity we had all missed. Family-owned businesses needing enterprise-level security with the simplicity of a consumer product. She led the development of a new product line that, within 2 years, became 30% of our annual revenue. "You made it," I told her after a particularly brilliant presentation to the board. "I didn't make it," she corrected with a smile. "I'm becoming competent. There's a difference. Competence is built with hard work. Arrogance just gets exposed over time." On the eve of my 35th birthday, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the MIT Computer Science graduation. I looked out at hundreds of young, hopeful faces in the audience. "You are about to enter a world where your work will often be undervalued," I began. "Where people who don't understand what you do will try to tell you how to do it. Where politics will sometimes seem more important than competence. Here is what I have learned. Protect your creations. Value your work. Demand respect. But, and this is crucial, do it without becoming the very thing you're fighting against. Defend yourselves without destroying innocent people in the process. Seek justice, not revenge. Because in the end, how you win matters just as much as that you win. Code is power. Patents are protection. But character is the foundation. Build your careers on a solid one." Today, at 38, I wake up in my apartment overlooking the city. It's not the biggest in town, but it's comfortable. In my home office, I have a single framed photo. Me and Daniel on that late night solving the critical bug. Both exhausted, but smiling. Below the photo, a simple metal plaque with 3 words, "Build with integrity." Digital Fortress continues to grow, but my greatest satisfaction comes from the messages I receive from developers, saying our culture inspired them to demand better treatment at their own companies, that our authorship protocol protected them from exploitation, that our story taught them it's possible to fight back with principles. Zenith still exists, smaller but stable and with a good culture. Margaret is a respected consultant on ethical management in tech. Sophia is a competent and respected product director at my own company. Carlos, my CTO and partner, continues to be the brilliant technical mind that turns ideas into reality. And me? I still code late at night sometimes. Not because I have to, but for the love of the art. Because in the end, code isn't just a job. It's the expression of how we think, how we solve problems, and how we build the future. Last week, I ran into a young developer at a coffee shop near the office. Laptop open, code on the screen, the same frustrated expression I knew so well. "Trouble with the code?" I asked. She sighed. "My boss said my solution is too complex. He wants me to simplify it, but the simplification he's suggesting will sacrifice the system's security." "And you know your solution is right?" "I know it. I've tested every possibility, but he doesn't understand the code enough to see why." I handed her my business card. "If he doesn't value your work, find a place that does, or better yet, build your own place. But do it the right way from the beginning. Clear contracts, protected intellectual property, and values in order." She looked at the card and her eyes widened. "You're John Baxter? From the Zenith story?" "I am. And the real lesson of that story isn't about revenge or bringing down systems. It's about knowing your value, defending it with integrity, and building something that lasts." She asked me one last question. "Can I ask you something? Do you regret any of it?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret harming innocent clients, even temporarily. I regret not fully considering all the consequences before I acted. I regret letting ego and anger guide critical decisions. But you don't regret defending yourself." "No, that was necessary. But today I would have defended myself better, in a way that protected my work without hurting anyone who had nothing to do with the conflict." She nodded thoughtfully and turned back to her code. I watched her work for another moment, then headed back to the office. I had a meeting with investors, a product presentation to prepare, and later some code to review. The life of someone building the future, one line of code at a time. With integrity,